The week was quiet and empty. Flooding our panic, moments turned to dust. A mournful smile slipped away. I want to dream a lifetime, an endless road, pushed, dragged by blind destiny, masters of death, stronger than desire, wandering men on earth. My name is Lucie Green, and this is my senior stage. The morning trail of exhausted illusions sank down in the snow, trembling. I've got the whole world in my head. I crave the space that will set me free. It's time to stop dancing now, burn the rest of the ribbon and take me with you. Something almost reminiscent of white hearts splattered across a blue sky. As we melt through layers of grain, melt into the earth, melt under layers of wind and fire, melt away under waves of unforgiving water, melt under a sun that blinks at me, graze soft strands of web with my fingertips. Why am I so angry? We can't help who we fall in love with. Our hands are cold and our spines are bent, and there are pockets of air that keep us alive. I am afraid that I have something to lose. Forgive, forgive. I love you. I don't ever want to live without you. For always. She was still beside me, and she was still mine, and it was the end. And there was no more time to think, but I think that something inside me is melting. My eyes feel like liquid, over and next, over and next. Language defines us, meta means beyond, and the only thing that makes us special is consciousness, you see. I know that to think and to feel are not the same thing, and so why do I constantly and consistently replace one with the other? She didn't even give him a chance. He didn't even give himself the chance to love her, so hard to build, so easy to destroy. Why do I have feelings about my feelings? Endless sky, a sky made of love, hands caught, words wrapped in fire. We are simply. I want to be strong and safe. Something is falling, but we are in orbit around each other. Give space for desire, for choice. Give time for chance. Live a little backwards. Laugh at the unlaughable. Find that feeling of feeling. Decide, be, question. Self-care is not selfish. Stress on words, emphasis on life. Everyone and everything fades because the walls around me are crumbling and I am shattering, and I want to grasp and feel and experience that moment again and again and again and again and again. Because you make me laugh from my heart, and you are too beautiful to properly exist in this world. You see, I loved you, and so I wrote your name across the earth in a language only angels could understand. I'm in love with words. I know that might sound strange, but this feeling I have is indescribable, inexpressible, and I think that's the best I can do. I can't remember a time that I didn't love to read. In poetry and novels, in songs and in stories, I see a painful transparency that begs me to become a part of them. The greatest stories tell of a balance in the universe, a reflection of ourselves, the good, the bad, the hope, the despair. Through storytelling, we empathize. We discover what it means to be human. I love to sink into the misleading security of narratives that eventually leave me unsatisfied or fulfilled, abandon me in states of joyous devastation. However, for a really long time, I didn't consider the other perspective. I rarely acknowledged the authors of the words I gave myself to so willingly. And when I did, I struggled to understand how these people who call themselves writers could create entire worlds and stories out of what I thought was absolutely nothing. I resented my teachers for trying to get me to write. I didn't get the appeal, to be honest. Trying to put your thoughts down on paper is both frustrating and demanding, and it was so much easier to just avoid all of those feelings by not doing it. I had 3 different teachers who each recommended that I start a journal. I was told repeatedly that just a sentence a day would help me feel less stressed and less overwhelmed. They told me that there is no right or wrong, and that whatever needed to show up on the page would. I don't think I had one singular clarifying moment of realization. I just remember knowing that I could never stop writing ever again. Writing is hard, it's painful, it has never gotten any easier, but it's absolutely worth it. I started reading poetry because I thought it was simple. I wanted something I could read in spare moments, just a couple of lines of what I thought was words randomly pushed together. The more I immersed myself in the genre, the more I began to think that poetry was intentionally imperfect. And then I met a poet who told me that if I truly thought that poetry was imperfect, I had clearly never tried to write a poem of my own. So I did. And I realized how much goes into a poem. Form, punctuation, tone, diction, these are all words you've heard in your English classes. The more time I spent agonizing over each individual word, the more I understood that poetry, to my surprise, was far from imperfect. In fact, I now believe that poetry is the most perfect form of expression. Poetry is not confined to the rich, the elite, the socially privileged. Poetry is the voice of the people. It is a celebration of history, of identity, of words and communication. Poetry is ambitious, creative, and brilliant, but above all, poetry is generous. It is not about having a flowery vocabulary or concealing layers upon layers of hidden meaning. All you have to do is be willing to sink your hands deep into the rich ink of language that is messy and murky and flawed enough to be human. I want to sit and watch the world change. I want to record everything I see and feel. I write to remember. I write to forget. I write to capture the beautiful and the horrifying, the fascinating and the confusing. I write knowing that language is both inadequate and eternal, that it is both destructive and healing. I write to allow myself to be swept up in something that is real and fake and bigger and smaller than myself. I want enough time to fall in love with everything, enough time to write about everything. I write because it would be a waste not to use this gift of literacy. I want to do more with words than force and bend. I want to capture everything, the essential and the dramatic, the intimate and the romantic. I write because it feels right. I write because writing is vulnerability, and it's easier to be vulnerable on paper than out loud. I want to return to the poem that I started with. Every poem I've ever written is just a draft. I honestly don't understand how published writers are ever content enough with a piece to send it out into the world and call it finished. I think my writing process is pretty typical. I write at least a sentence a day in my journal, and I write when something, action, or phrase is perpetually stuck in my mind. When I sit down to write something specific, though, I do what most English teachers tell you to do initially. I try to keep the pencil moving, and then I go back and revise. This poem has been minimally revised since that first step. It is intentionally messy. I wrote this poem specifically for this audience because I wanted to give you a glimpse inside my mind. You might recognize phrases you've heard before, words that are not necessarily mine. This poem is a collection of all the stuff that is running through my brain, words and lyrics and events and people in my life. It is conversations I have overheard, relationships I have observed, desires and longings and aspirations and hope and despair and so many questions. It is a stream of consciousness, with occasional punctuation and little organization. I want my words to be accessible. There's really not much to interpret. In this case, what you see is what you get. I want to share one of my favorite poems with you in honor of National Poetry Month. It's called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, who died in January of this year. Winner of both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, Mary Oliver was, in my eyes, the guiding voice to poetry of the natural world. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. This poem is a perfect, simple, soft expression of self-identity and love. My advice to you is to take moments to recognize and celebrate these things. So here are some prompts. Do you remember that time we did, we saw, we felt? That time in the car with the music and the darkness? That time the world ended? That time we held each other? That time we got back up? That time your smile made me feel better? That time it didn't? That time we were quiet? That time we laughed? That time I fell in love with your voice and your words and your imperfections? That time we were early? That time we were late? That time it rained and we danced? That time when nothing was okay? That time we held our breath? That time we forgave ourselves? That time we had strength? That time we endured? That time we felt wretched and unstoppable? Start a journal, write a poem, just see what happens. There's no right or wrong. Whatever needs to show up on the page will. Thank you.